When can we truly be said to know? What is knowledge? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. We just talked about metaphysics, right? Today we're going to get into a different subject as well, epistemology. And I have a couple more subjects that we'll talk about. And I think what's going to be cool is that we'll do a little metaphysics, do a little epistemology, do a little bit of each one of these things, so it doesn't feel like a class. So we're kind of perusing rather than delving. But here's an interesting question. What is knowledge? So for those of you who don't know, I was once in the Air Force, and I had a lot of good friends that were missileers, which is probably the most thankless job. Here's your job as a missileer. You go into an underground silo for days at a time, waiting to launch a nuclear missile to destroy an entire city once the president gives you the go-ahead, right? And I can't really tell you much about, that's well-known stuff, right? So that's not classified in any way. But let me give you, so I'm not going to tell you really much about it, but other than I love those guys. My friends were great kids. Love you, Candelarias, Chomp, Walt. Man, I love you guys. You guys were awesome. Courtney was my boss. She was so cool. Well, anyway, as a missileer, you had like a really tough decision to make, and I'm not going to give you any of the deets, right? None of the details, because I don't want to be arrested for life. But let's say you get a phone call from the president one day, and it says, "Okay, I want you to press the button." And those of you guys who are missileers, you'll know that I'm not giving away any secrets, because this isn't how it happens, right? But let's say the president calls you himself and says, "Hey, buddy, I want you to press the button and destroy Vancouver." Let's say, blow up, annihilate Vancouver. Go. Now, if you know that this was all correct, that this was the president, and that they give, that you're supposed to launch the missile, and you don't do it, then there could be some massive repercussions for not doing that, right? Not just to yourself and to your career, but possibly, let's say, it leads to thousands of lives die. Americans, let's say, could have been saved because you would have destroyed Vancouver and they would have invaded and just set off a bunch of dirty bombs. I don't know, something crazy, right? No offense, Vancouver, man. I know this. That it's so absurd. That's why I'm using your city, because there's no way, right? You're a great city. I've been there only once, and it was awesome, man. Still remember that place. That was at high school too. It's a long time ago. But so let's say you get this notification. You need to blow up Vancouver if you know that you got the call. But what if you weren't totally sure, right? What if you didn't know for a fact that was the president? What if there was some uncertainty, some question, and then you turned the key? Well, you would be responsible for killing an entire city of innocent people, and it definitely is something that you shouldn't do, right? These guys, that is a tough question. I heard rumors. Now, I never really asked anybody specifically, but I heard rumors of guys that said, if I got the call, I would never do it, even if I got the call. Wow, that's, again, I'm not making any claims one way or another. I'm just saying that is a tough call, man. That's crazy. And it seems like if you don't know, then you should not push the button. But if you do know, now you should push the button, right? So it's weird. It seems like knowledge is something that has some kind of ethical bind on us. If we know, all of a sudden it means that we're responsible. If we don't know, we might be responsible for our, it might change the responsibility of our actions. It might make us, again, if you don't know, you shouldn't do that thing, right? So in this case, it would be like a huge question, right? Like all depending on what is it exactly to say that I know. How can I say that I know the president just called me? Here's another interesting question that is similar, and then I'm going to change it a little bit, and you'll see why the difference is important. Now let's say that video games have come along so far that let's say that virtual reality video games are absolutely a thing, right? That they are so clearly like virtual reality-esque that it seems like you're like actually in the real world. It seems like a real world when you're in it. And so you have no reason to doubt, let's say, that this game is that you're getting hooked up to is a virtual reality game, and that it's so realistic that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now, let's say the people who are making the game, they say, now go ahead and here's your rifle, go out and you know, your job is to shoot everybody that's wearing a red shirt. Those are all the bad guys. And you go out and you start shooting all the red people, and then all of a sudden you find out, wait a second, this wasn't a virtual reality. This is the real world. Oh my gosh, right? You had no reason to believe that it wasn't that it wasn't a video game. These kinds of video games exist all over the place, and yet you were duped. And because you didn't know for a fact that this was a video game, that this was the real world, then we might be forgiving, right? We would call it manslaughter, not murder. If you knew it was the real world, then all of a sudden we would call that murder because you were intending, right, to kill these people. So the knowledge here would absolve you of any kind of guiltiness. And now reverse that and say that you are in a video game, but you think you're in the real world, right? Not knowing all of a sudden is going to make you responsible. We might say that if you're going around shooting people and you think that they're real people, but you didn't know this was a video game, now you're not absolved of the guiltiness anymore, right? This is what's kind of weird, right? Like you're not actually, like you didn't actually kill anybody, and yet you possibly in every way were acting exactly as if you were killing somebody, right? Mentally, maybe even physically, you were going through motions as if you were killing somebody. The only difference is in the receiving end, and on the receiving end, you know, you have no connection there, right? So it's interesting. Knowledge holds us responsible. Knowledge also affords us opportunities. We might say in this case where you're in the video game and you didn't know it, you could have gotten some enjoyment out of it, right? You could have gone, I don't know, and stolen some candy just for funsies, right? And you didn't do it because you thought it was real. Had you known, you may have done some crazy stuff. Maybe jumped off a cliff and see what it's like to fly. I don't know, anything crazy. So knowledge holds us accountable, and it affords us opportunities, Here's the weird thing. It's not so easy to tell when it is that you know. Now, what I'm about to say, I'm not saying we don't know this, okay? I am saying that it's interesting, right? Like, how exactly does knowledge form? You might think, once I've said it, that, yeah, we don't know this stuff. I personally think we do. But let me just get into it, because this is just confusing if I'm not actually going into it. Do you know that water is H2O? Seems like we do, right? Yeah, water is H2O. Have you ever seen it? I personally never looked under a microscope and seen, hydrogen and oxygen all set up in just the right way. I've never seen H2O, right? I've never seen the particles like that. So you may ask, well, then why do I think that I know that water is H2O? Oh, I read it in a book, right? I read some scientists wrote in this book that water is H2O. Of course, did that person see that water is H2O? Possibly, right? But there are definitely things in that book that person did not see for him or herself, right? Even if there's like a collection of guys, right, of women and men that are all working together, they're going to put something in there that they didn't actually do the experiment themselves. They read it in a peer-reviewed journal or some kind of craziness. In other words, we typically want to say that we know these things, even if we haven't seen them for ourselves, right? We may have read it in a book, and the only reason that we think that we know that thing is because the person who wrote that book, we think, saw it or knew somebody that saw it. Notice how like that's, like a second level. And then that person that let's say is claimed to actually seen that water is H2O. Well, sometimes people lie, right? Sometimes people make mistakes. So do we know with absolute certainty they didn't make a mistake? I don't know. But we typically would think that there's no good reason to believe that person would be lying or making a mistake. Why? Because lots of people have done that experiment, and even if, maybe they could all be in a conspiracy together where they're all trying to deceive us all, but we can always check, right? That somebody can go as check and then bust them all, so they would have little reason to actually lie to us for this, So for all those reasons, we want to say, I know that water is H2O. But think about how weird that is, right? We're saying that we're getting knowledge, but it's from like a third-hand source that we could be deceived about, just very low chances that we're deceived. Is that knowledge? I mean, I think so, right? But how do we know? How do we know unless we know what knowledge is first? So that's the question of epistemology. What is it to know something, right? Is it that I have to actually see it in front of me? Is it that I can I rely on some reasonable authorities? Maybe you want to say that you can't trust your senses. Maybe you can only know things that you reason to in your mind because our senses can deceive us. We can have hallucinations and stuff like that. I don't think you want to go so far as to say, you can't know anything, but maybe you do. I don't know. That's our question for epistemology. What is it that constitutes knowledge? What is it that if we had, X, Y, and Z, we would say, therefore I know this thing. Now, as I always say, best philosophy happens in dialogue. So let me know, what do you think? What is it when we know something? And also, please leave me any questions that you want in the comments. That would be awesome. Like, subscribe, comment, and please tell your friends so that they can join the conversation. That's all I got. Adios.